Heyo, and welcome to part 2 of my trauma unit. In this section, we are taking the wounds from part 1 and we are making them quite infected. I would like to clarify that these symptoms are not actually real. In my mind, this is a post-apocalyptic disease, so I kind of made up what the symptoms would be. However, I did reference real-life photographs in order to create something that would be somewhat realistic. So here's how I got this look. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is to take a foundation that is lighter than your skin tone and apply that to your face and all down your neck. This person, like I said before, is very sick, so they're not going to have a lot of sun interaction. They're going to look very pale and very unwell. Like all of the warm colors have been leached out of the skin. Then what you're going to want to do is to start contouring and highlighting your face. And it's okay to make the contour and the highlight to be very strong. In fact, it's probably better because you really want it to look like this face has been hollowed out. So start by contouring under your cheeks. I thinned out my nose, and I also tried to make my eyes look more sunken in by putting a contour color on the crease of my eye. Additionally, I tried to make my bags under my eyes more prevalent by also adding a contour color under there in order to make it look like this person has not gotten a lot of sleep because of this illness and because of just being uncomfortable. I also did a really cool effect where I pursed my lips, kind of like you were puckering up, and taking the sponge with the foundation on it and patting it on. And what's that going to do is when you relax your mouth, you're going to notice that all of the foundation has hit all of the more pronounced parts of that pucker. And so you're going to get actually what looks like cracks in your lips because your natural lip color is going to be shining through the deeper valley parts of that pucker. If you have a lip liner that is a very pretty pink rosy color, keep it and treasure it forever. Whenever I want to create scars on my face and old scars on my face, I usually use that to draw them in, and they actually look really realistic. Perfect color. And so just a reminder, you can use other products on other parts of your face in order to create an effect that you want to achieve. What I'm doing right now is I'm going over where all of the cuts on my face were in the last video. I am using reference photos, which you can kind of see in the background of where my cuts were, in order to kind of guesstimate where I should draw them in. And I'm just starting by drawing them in with that pencil. So doing the forehead cut, doing the cheek cut, and also doing the small little scratches that were on the mouth and on the eyebrow. The next thing I'm doing is taking some rigid collodion and I am applying it on the forehead and on the cheek scars. Now what rigid collodion does is once when it dries, it starts to create these divots in your skin and it makes it look like your skin is sunken in. The more layers you apply, the more deeper the cut is going to look. I didn't want to use liquid latex to this because I wanted it to look like the wounds have started to heal. What this will do is create a physical depth to the wounds to make it look like they were once deep, and they still kind of are in comparison to the little scratches that are on my face. The next thing that I do is I take a mauve color and I start to go over those cuts on the forehead and on the cheek. Even though rigid collodion gives you the physical depth, you want the visual depths as well. Also, because these wounds were deeper, they need to look a lot more severe than the scratches that you have on your face. So I took a mauve color and I went over them to darken them up. I did end up taking a very bright red and going around them. One of the common themes you will see in this is that I wanted a rash to be spread kind of about the body. So I wanted the rash to appear around the open wounds. And so I just took a brush and some red and I literally just dotted it around the wound to make it look irritated. And then on a different wheel, I took a black color, a black cream paint, and I added it to the middle of the wounds to create even more depth. The reason why I chose black is because this is an old wound, it's been healing for a while, but also something's not right about it. It is a bit infected, so it's not going to be a natural color. So the next part of the disease that I wanted to create were these bulbous blisters. And so starting on my chest, I put down a layer of liquid latex. Then I took a cotton ball and I kind of split it up into smaller pieces, and I put small pieces of cotton where I wanted these blisters to be. Then I went back in with the liquid latex and I saturated the cotton with them. Now, cotton takes a lot longer to dry than Kleenex does, so it is important to use a hairdryer. You don't have to use a hairdryer, but it's going to take forever for the cotton to dry if you don't. So use a hairdryer to completely dry the cotton. And then if you want your blisters to be a lot bigger, you can go in with a second layer of cotton. And I use this to kind of build up the blisters to the size I want it to be. Make sure that you make them in various sizes and shapes, because it would look very strange if everything was very uniform. And you just want to keep building them up that way until you get the size and the shape that you are happy with. Another thing that you can do while your cotton and latex is drying is to put more makeup on in other areas. So I applied this fake rash on my other side of the chest and I kind of brought it up my neck. I also wanted to add some smaller blisters to my face, so that's what I did. I followed the exact same strategy for the blisters that I did on my chest, but this time I wanted one of the blisters to look like it had already popped. So what I did on a bare patch of skin was I went over it with a couple of layers of liquid latex. Around 3 to 4 should work. Once again, making sure each layer dries completely before adding the next. And then I kind of followed the same procedure that I did to make the cuts in the last video, where I took some tweezers to poke a hole into the liquid latex. Then I kind of used my fingers and a palette tool that I had to just create the hole and to make the hole a lot bigger. Once when you color it in, it looks phenomenal and gross. So what I did to color these blisters was I took a yellow from my bruise wheel and I went around the edges of the blisters. I wanted to leave the very top points of the blisters to be that weird off-white that the liquid latex and cotton naturally gives you, but I wanted to make the edges look very yellow and kind of pussy. So that's what I did. I just took a brush, took the yellow, and I just applied it around the bottom of the blisters. In order to color in the popped blister, I took that very bright red color and I started to color in the inside of it. Make sure to get underneath the peeled up liquid latex. And then I used the maroon color to kind of create a dot in the center where the blister was at its deepest. You don't really need to go outside of the blister in order to color it in. You don't really need to create that much irritation in the skin. Most of the skin that's irritated is going to be the newly exposed skin from the popped blister. I took some Vaseline on the end of my palette knife and I applied it into the wound. That's supposed to be the leftover pus. It's not 100% the right color, but it does have the right effect. Just to note, I found that working with the Vaseline to be slightly difficult because Vaseline likes to stick to everything, but it does create the effect that I wanted, and if you're patient, you'll be able to get it exactly where you want it to be. After all of that, I basically did the exact same thing on my right arm. I created a cluster of blisters, and I also created some popped blisters. I used the exact same technique as I used for the blisters on my chest and on my cheek, and I colored them the exact same way that I colored the blisters on my chest and on my cheek. Then I moved on to my left arm. Now I used reference photos once again from the previous video to figure out where exactly my scratches were. I kind of just drew them in with the bright red color. We'll go back and we'll make it darker and more realistic. I just wanted to make sure that I got the rough position correct. Then I took the rigid collodion and I applied it only to the top of the scratches. My plan was to put a bandage around that arm, and I just wanted the top of the scratches to be poking out of that bandage. So I wanted those parts to look really, really deep. So I followed the same steps that I used for the cuts that were on my face in order to apply the rigid collodion. I then took a bandage, and you can find this at any drugstore, and I just wrapped it around my arm to be exactly where I wanted it to be. Again, with some of the scratches just poking out. Now, here is where things start to get clever. I had recently purchased a water activated paint by Mayron, and this character has basically been through hell and high water, and there's no way that this bandage is going to be pristinely white. And that's where these paints come in. I took them, I put water on them so that way they would activate, and then I started to color in the bandage. I used browns, I used blacks, I used yellows. I think I might have even used a bit of green just to try to get the bandage all muddied up. One of the problems with the bandage was that it was really textured and it's really hard to get the paint into the crevices. That's where the beauty of water activated paints actually comes in. After you apply the color, you can dip your brush into water and go back to the paint that you had already applied and wipe it across. It will dilute the paints, but the paints will suddenly be able to fill in all of those crevices that you weren't able to get. And in doing that, you kind of color in the bandage to make it look more realistic and more effective, and it ends up looking really, really cool. I then took the red paint and I went over where the red scratches would be. Blood seeps and it comes out, and I figured that that's what would happen on this bandage, so you would see a bit of blood. And so I took the red and I drew the lines where I thought those scratches would be. And then once again, I went back and dipped my paintbrush in with some more water, and I saturated the colors even more with the water so that way it would blend out and kind of look like I bled out a bit to make it look a lot more convincing. Straight lines are not convincing, but a whole bunch of spread out red definitely looks like you have bled through this bandage. I then took my cream paint and I colored in the deep wound the exact same way I colored in the cuts on the head in order to give it a lot more depth. I also took the cream paint and I went down the bandage where the wounds would be, because that's where the most amount of saturation of blood would have been, so that part of the bandage would have been darker than the rest of the part. This kind of created a really cool effect. It made the bandage a lot more dimensional. Also, to create even a better cover of blood and make it look like it bled out a lot more, I actually went in with the Graftabin Magic Blood as well. I took the powder and I powdered it on the bandage on the area where it'd be most bloody, and I took water and I sprayed it so that way the bandage became even more bloody. And this actually worked really, really well. I think that the Magic Blood is a great way to get bandages bloody fast. And I did have a paper towel with me just in case the things got too wet and started to drip everywhere. And you kind of see me patting it a bit to make sure that I didn't lose control over the blood. I then went in with the bright red once again, and I created that rash around the exposed cuts. I don't have video of this, but I did add a rash on my upper right arm as well to kind of create the idea that it's spreading and it's all over the body. And you will see that in the final footage. And the very last thing I did was I took down my hair and I sprayed it with water. I wanted my hair to look a lot more greasy, like this person hasn't had a chance to clean themselves up. And that's about it. That's the entire makeup look. I had a lot of fun making this one. And stay tuned for part 3 where things look even more dire than it did before.